My grocery bill should not dictate my purpose in life.
Yeah.
The cost of a tank of gas should not dictate me succeeding in accomplishing the things I intend to accomplish. Welcome to another episode of Money Therapy. I'm Brandon Chasteen, and alongside me here is Bill McGill. What's up,
What's up,
Bill?
everybody? Welcome back.
Just kidding. I found out I had some of these.
Brandon
Some
just
cool
discovered a
programs.
soundboard, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I got tools that I didn't realize I had.
we should do the fart one whenever you're speaking.
I don't have that. Stop. All right. Hey, so I think where we're at in this year, we always try to look ahead, and we've talked a little bit about elections and taxes and goals and creating healthy habits. We've talked about asking the right question and stop focusing on the things you can't control necessarily, like when we spoke mainly specifically about market volatility, right? Like, I'm going to stop asking the question about why is my account going up and down, and I'm going to start asking the question, what am I doing to create greater cash flow? And I think if I can just create more cash flow,
hmm
problems get solved. Even if my account goes down, I want more cash flow. So how do I do that? And that's so we've talked about a bunch of stuff already this year. I think it's been pretty good. Um, Over the past few weeks, I've had the pleasure, the honor to onboard several new clients, and in having initial conversations within the first or second appointment, we're talking a lot about goals, right? We dig in, we get deep, and through several questions, I have started to notice there are some very common obstacles to getting what we want. There's some
Yeah,
common obstacles I think we are all facing. I don't care where you're at on the wealth building spectrum, from like getting started to nearly finished. We're
yeah.
probably all experiencing similar things. I went back, looked, and narrowed that down to six things, and I want to talk about those six things with you today, Bill, and anybody who's listening. I do hope this is a highly attended discussion, because I think we're all like, we're not just going to talk about the obstacles today, but we're actually going to talk about what we can do to like break down some of those barriers, or climb some walls.
I love practical tips.
Practical tips.
Yeah,
So let's jump in again. We'll talk about kind of six different things, but the question is what is keeping you from from building wealth? What is keeping you from being wealthy? What is keeping you from your dreams? Like today, like right now, like why aren't you there yet? Um,
yeah,
and one of the big obstacles, the first thing that almost everybody is saying to me, is it has to do with inflation. Um, Things are just way more expensive
yeah,
since exiting the pandemic. So 2020, coming out of 2021, we've seen monthly measures from many federal and non-state sanctioned regulatory agencies, suggesting that we've had kind of runaway inflation. And even though it's coming back down, it's still not down. It's not deflationary. Things aren't going to get cheaper.
right.
Hopefully, we can just control it enough that we might be able to catch up,
Yeah,
right? Um,
yeah.
so, Bill, like, what some of the things you are hearing, seeing, noticing about like life right now in terms of inflation?
Yeah, I think back to this stupid little video that I saw online, and it's like these stick figure drawing guys, and he's like interviewing a financial planner or something, and basically the financial planner is like, you can't afford life, dude. And the guy's like, yeah, what's with eggs? And the guy goes, yeah, eggs are having a year, man. Like, they're awesome. It's like, and it made me laugh, but there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of people are feeling it at the grocery store. um Inflation seems to be something that people kind of forget about when things are kind of status quo. When inflation is something that seems to, when it flares up like it has over the last couple of years, it hits people on an everyday basis. Whereas, when things are cheaper and inflation isn't a big deal, people don't really focus on that. They focus more on kind of longer term things. And now that inflation's kind of up, they're talking about groceries, they're talking about, their car payments, they're talking about interest rates on mortgages and how crazy the real estate market is. And I think really what's happening is people are trying to find a foothold with their personal finances on exactly where to go. If mortgages and real estate are going up faster than inflation and things like that, how are you supposed to kind of stabilize your biggest monthly expense, which is typically a mortgage or your rent, and so those, if rent and mortgages are, very much impacted by inflation and interest rates and those things, and those are, seem to be skyrocketing, people feel it a lot faster in their pockets, and they're looking for ways. What I've been talking about with clients is they're looking for ways to increase cash flow.
Yeah. I think, when it comes to inflation, a couple really, really strong, um, I want people to know and understand a couple things that I think sometimes I think we're well, I think as a general population we're getting better at understanding the consequences of inflation.
Right.
I think we're getting better at understanding because it's been hanging around for so long. At this point, we're hearing and learning things.
I was gonna say
Um,
it's been hitting us in the face for the last 2 years. So
Yeah. Generally speaking, the goal of kind of the American economy is to have a built-in inflationary environment that is controlled. We
mhm.
typically want inflation to be somewhere around 2 to 2.5% per year. And we want not only your cost of goods to go up, but also your wages to go up over time as well. These do not always happen in tandem. Like sometimes we get a little bit more inflation on cost of goods, and then we might go a couple years without any raises, and then all of a sudden you get a pretty large raise. And we always feel like we're a little bit behind when it comes to our income. We'll talk about that in a second, but you have to understand, like, I think first of all, the big thing is getting back into a healthy range is not the same thing as deflation. Getting back into a healthy range does not mean things are going to get less expensive. It just
Mhm.
isn't going to be so far out of control, right? So the Federal Reserve will say we have beat inflation. You'll see headlines in the news about how we've kind of won this battle against inflation when we get to that 2.5% range. But understand we're still increasing like goods from a collective perspective of probably 2 to 2.5%.
Right.
We don't think we're going to get into a deflationary environment, especially long term. So we shouldn't go to the store in hopes of like next week or next month things actually being cheaper, right?
Right.
What your grocery bill is likely going to stick in and around, maybe even slightly higher over the next year. We just shouldn't be as shocked next year, perhaps.
Right.
The other thing with that is we have to understand one of the ways that inflation is caused ultimately by an imbalance of supply and demand, right?
Mhm.
A lot more demand, not enough supply, cost of goods go up. We see this in homes, we see this in energy and in commodities, food and availability, and all of this has been largely again. You can kind of go back and see the culprit being the pandemic, being like a transition into like this remote work, the forced kind of stay at home orders, people not being able to get to the places to produce the goods,
Mhm.
shipping delays, and then we had employment issues, and then also we just had a ton of free money dumped into. So all of this stuff ultimately, and we're just kind of picking up the pieces now, and it's a lot easier. I always equate this to like a child. A child can destroy the cleanliness of a toy room in like less than 60 seconds, right?
Right.
Every toy can come off the shelf, out of the toy box, all over the floor, paint on the ceiling. Like the amount of mess that can be made so quickly by a child is incredible. Ask
Yeah.
that same child to clean up their mess, and it will be a 3-hour emotional ordeal for the parents and the child, right?
Yeah, it could take
And
all
that's kind
day.
of that's kind of what we're dealing with, right? So, um, one
It's a good
one way
analogy. I like that.
one way that we're trying to combat inflation is by keeping money tight, which means one of the things we do is keep inflation's high. We're having a today while we're recording a treasury auction. All these things start to matter into the Federal Reserve trying to control the available money in the economy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear a lot of people talking about is this anticipation for rate cuts. Sometimes I hear them, what they're saying is, when are interest rates going back to 2%? It's way different than anticipated rate cuts by the Federal Reserve and
Right.
what normal is. So we got to get rid of that recency bias. And to be fair, I'm not going to tell you today when rates are coming down, and I'm not telling you what they're going down to because I don't know.
Right.
Um, anyway, long story short is inflation makes things more expensive. It can break an economy ultimately. So we got to control it. Do that by raising the cost of borrowing money,
Mhm.
which in turn, if you, like, I was looking at some stuff the other day, a mortgage that I had like 3 years ago, for roughly like $1,700 would be almost $3,400, almost double today. The cost between the rise in home values and the higher interest rates.
Yeah.
So so the question becomes, how do I combat inflation so I can get on track, so I can get back on track, so I can start building wealth? And this is a hard thing to do, but we have to start demanding and shopping and spending time seeking value, right?
Mhm.
I remember growing up, my mom, like, we didn't have a lot of money. We had almost no money. And coupons were like a big part of like the Sunday morning paper, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um, Mom would sit there and cut coupons and put them all in a Ziploc bag and take those in, and she would save some money.
Mhm.
Um, I think that there's resources available to people, but, like, maybe it is value shopping. Now we don't necessarily need to wait on the newspaper. We can go to the internet and see, hey, we even have like these online grocery apps now. You can add things to
Oh,
your
yeah.
cart. Maybe it takes a little more time to add it to the cart and then add it to the Publix cart and see which one's cheaper,
Yeah.
ultimately. And maybe it takes a little more time to go two different places to pick that up. Sometimes that can be worth your time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so
I think it's huge to look at every dollar now, especially when inflation, all these things are kind of hitting us in the face. Look at every dollar that you have as an investment, even in your expense category. One thing that jumped into mind, real quick story. I saw an interview with Mark Cuban, and it was a couple years ago, but he was saying that people don't look at everyday expenses as a potential investment. For instance, like you brush your teeth twice a day every single day. That's what you're going to do. And
right.
so if you can find a toothpaste that whether you like it or not, it's a good toothpaste, and let's say you buy 10 tubes of it and they're willing to give you a 15% discount on it. It's like, well, you just saved 15, that's a 15% investment because you get to keep, you're not essentially overpaying for toothpaste. And you can do that with food and other things. But that's what you need to start looking at too. Yes, it does take a little extra time, but a lot of times it can be worth it because,
So I,
paying attention and all those things can help you keep the
I just
hard-earned money that you
I
have.
just heard you say, to combat inflation, we brush our teeth less. Is that? I'm just kidding.
That's exactly the opposite of what I said.
So we'll come back to this over and over, but really for the first four things here, one common theme that I think is so important, to really master this stuff, is to understand who you are and your value as a person.
Right.
When you look into the mirror, you need to be wildly happy with the person looking back at you. You need to have the confidence and the just the gratitude for the human being that you are. And the reason why I say that's such an important place to start is because understanding that in times of higher inflation, as we start to realize, like, our resources they aren't going the distance that they used to go in terms of cash flow resources. Sometimes my goals that I have need to be reordered, and sometimes but sometimes I feel like they're being forced to be reordered or recalibrated. And I would just argue that if you have the right plan in place and you value yourself the way that you need to value yourself, it is completely okay. And sometimes you'll want to. I think we kind of spoke to this in the last episode. Um, like you can say no to things, and because of who you are, right? Because of who I am, it's not a sacrifice. It's not costing me to say no. It's actually benefiting me to say no because I get to do the things I want. Right?
Right.
My grocery bill should not dictate my purpose in life.
Right.
The cost of a tank of gas should not dictate me succeeding in accomplishing the things I intend to accomplish. And if it comes down to a choice of Brandon pays for a tank of gas or he succeeds in his goals, I look in the mirror and I say, you know what? It's worth it right now to either say no or, hey, Bill, you got to come pick me up if you want to hang out tonight.
Hmm.
Right. Like I'm happy to repay you by getting a drink, but we're definitely going to carpool to this event together. Otherwise, I just can't make it. Right.
Right.
Like there's things about me going on in my life right now that are just way more important. And I'm saying yes to that instead. So
Yeah.
over the next few things, like that's going to be a mindset that is so core to being successful in overcoming the barriers of wealth building is just having incredible sense of purpose, value in who you are, a lot of confidence. And honestly, when you look in the mirror, just being like, that's one fine specimen staring back at me. And I want to do everything I can to make that person successful.
Yeah.
Number two,
Couldn't agree more.
this is kind of really coinciding with number one, but just debt. Like
Hmm.
oftentimes, like, hey, why aren't we starting? Like, Bill, you say all these things are important. Why haven't we started on it yet? Like, well, I got this like huge amount of debt, and I knew this was going to be my income, and I just like at the time, like I felt like a budget of $72,000 for expenses was going to be more than enough. And I was going to be able to have fun and travel and pay my bills and do all this stuff. And then I was going to put all this extra stuff towards that. I was going to pay off my student loans in, 3 years.
Yeah.
Well, now all of a sudden, again, back because of inflation, it's not $72,000, it's $96,000. And all that
Yeah.
available money is gone. And you don't even get to travel. Right. So
Yeah.
really this debt is a huge barrier. And I'm barely making it just paying minimum payments. And at this point, it's going to take me 15 years.
Yeah. I think the thing that jumps out to me is, we were talking about going against the grain. For in terms of going out and living life, people hate to say no, but sometimes when you say no and create some discipline, it feels like you're saying yes to other goals, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about market cycles in the past, and I tend to think that a lot of things in life are very cyclical, but in terms of just even 3 years ago when interest rates and borrowing money was so cheap, what do we hear on a daily basis? Oh, go ahead and get that house, borrow as much as you can because money is so cheap. If you're borrowing at 2.5%, inflation is 3%, and you can go, whatever the argument is,
Yeah.
the main thing is like, well, money's so cheap. Why don't you just borrow it? Right. And so now things are tightening up economically speaking. And so now you're starting to feel that cash flow thing. So, we're always preaching here at Harpeth Wealth Partners, mindfulness on your personal finances. And now is a great time to get recalibrated. And when if and when we cycle back to, maybe things are a little bit cheaper to borrow on and things, remember this time, and remember how hard it was to create cash flow during this time when things tighten up. And so that's part of what Brandon and I are here for, is figuring that out for you and finding those people that are really struggling, like you said, really struggling making the minimum payments on their debts. That's really, it's really holding them back right now. And so how can we get creative and create that discipline to start freeing up that cash flow is a huge thing.
Yeah. So I think we've done some podcast on debt reduction strategies, right?
Right.
We've talked about like avalanche and snowball kind of approaches to paying down debt. Um, I think again, you still need some free cash flow in order to be able to do that stuff. One
Yeah.
thing that does come to mind, I've had some success with particular clients in particular situations, um, doing kind of debt consolidation strategies and tactics that aren't uh, kind of a we're not leveraging those like kind of criminal agencies that want to just charge you infinite amounts of money. But there are
Right.
some strategies out there that do incorporate like refinance or refinancing your mortgage, utilizing leveraging a HELOC in some situations, especially beautiful when we can use these tools to create like to potentially get and acquire some sort of asset that can produce more positive cash flow, because then whatever new cash flow I can create should help elevate and allow me to start paying down debt and come up with a strategy. So I think there are some spaces. Understanding healthy debt versus unhealthy debt is wildly important when we're talking about utilizing other people's money. We need to understand when it makes sense and when it doesn't. Obviously, anything we're talking about here, when we talk about acquiring debt, or creating cash flow, there's generally some sense of inherent risk involved in almost anything that we do, that it could end up costing us more than we benefit, which I think
Hmm.
is the simplest definition of risk. Um, so getting really, understanding that it probably takes some individual consulting for your kind of unique situation is very important. But at the end of the day,
Hmm.
I I urge people to not be afraid to confront their debt. Right? I think
Yeah.
sometimes I meet a lot of people in situations that have been in situations for a long time. They've almost accepted their situation, their circumstances as like status quo, kind of just is what it is. And
Hmm.
and within like a few minutes of conversation, I can't tell you how many times I've been like, "Hey, have you thought about doing this?" And they're like, "No, that's really smart." I'm like, "Dude, it's not that smart." Like that I knew that before I was a CFP. That's not even like
Yeah.
financial advice. That's
Yeah.
just bro
You're
advice. And
you're
they're like,
like,
"Oh,
go get
I
a
never
side
thought about that."
hustle. And they're like,
And
yeah.
the reason why they haven't thought about it is that they've been inside the jar trying to read the label, right? And they just needed
Hmm.
that moment. Because as soon as I said it, they were like, "That makes so much sense for me." Um, so
Yeah.
don't be
I,
afraid to confront the scary demons inside your financial ecosystem, the things we feel might be mistakes. Sometimes mistakes cost money to fix. I just think it's
yeah.
so important. Like it being naive or hiding from circumstance isn't going to help anyone accomplish anything quicker.
Yeah, and be what I would emphasize too is be your biggest cheerleader and your best friend. The one
And that
thing that
goes
I
back to
struggle
knowing who
with,
you are.
yeah, the one thing that I've always struggled with any kind of goal is getting hard on myself. Like, come on, you can do better. Just kind of a negative train of thought, and it's like I love this saying. Treat yourself like somebody, like if you were taking care of somebody you cared about. And so once you get to the position where you've diagnosed the problem, we're talking about personal finances here, but you diagnose the problem and let's say it is debt and you need to radically change one thing or the other, whether it's your income going up or your cash flow paying off some things to free up cash flow, or whatever the strategy is. Look at yourself as if you're like your best friend asking you for advice,
Yeah.
and it doesn't, you don't always have to have the absolute professional in your corner, because maybe your buddy's like, dude, just go make more money, and then like pay off these things and like be smarter. And so I would just emphasize like, eh, spend effort diagnosing the problem, and then once you have the problem, be your best friend and your own cheerleader, and get people in your corner to help you, and turn that into a positive thing more than anything else, because
Yeah.
getting down on yourself and getting negative about it is not going to help.
Right. I think, yeah, I mean, staring at these big scary monsters and just sometimes we can talk ourselves out of uh taking action, talking to people. There's too much embarrassment to bring it up to Brandon or whatever the case may be. So I'm just going to sit on it and wait till he finds it. Like, it's not a good
Right.
strategy, like let's just call it what it is. We all go through life. We're all trying to figure things out. Sometimes we're
Mhm.
making decisions that we have to make and not decisions that we want to make. And
Mhm.
ultimately, a lot of times most people are going to make a mistake, and sometimes it's a little embarrassing. But if we just all realize we're all in this experiment together, and inside of community, magic can happen. Um, Again, it goes back to just saying, hey, I'm worth the risk of being a little bit embarrassed or a little bit uncomfortable, because
Right.
chances are the people in my circle are going to stand up and help me as much as possible, and they're not going to like hold it against me. So
Yeah.
that's let's move on.
Yeah, let's
Number
keep rocking.
three, number three, stagnant wages.
Mhm.
Um,
Big topic
Again,
right now.
there's a lot of statistical evidence coming out almost on a monthly basis. We're finally starting to see some wage growth. It's not like I kind of equate it to like a lot of people have been drowning, and
Mhm.
probably at best they're finally getting their nostril above the water line. That's
Sure.
kind of the wage. Like, it's not enough wage growth. Like, most people are like, well, I haven't seen any wage growth.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Again, I want to
Eggs are having a
start
great year.
just by reiterating, it comes down to your own self-worth, right? If you don't value yourself, you're not going like nobody, you're not demanding anybody else to value your time.
Yeah.
I was just having a conversation with a lady. She's a client now. And she was like, is there any chance of you like kind of discounting your cost? And I told her, I was like, I fully empathize with the fact that things are expensive. I am by no way trying to um gouge people, right?
Yeah.
I have a valuable product. My time is going to be involved, and my time is very valuable to
Sure.
me and to my daughter and to my fiance, to my young family. So in all of that, no, I couldn't discount the offer that I gave her.
Yeah.
And I think she appreciated that response. And it really truthfully is something where I'm not just trying to be expensive for the sake of being expensive.
Yeah,
But
but there's a difference between that and sticking to your guns and say, like, for the listener out there, like, there's a lot of changes in the job market happening right now. Don't let if you know that you're worth X, like, a way to help, we're talking about cash flow and freeing up money and all this thing. Like, one way to do that, other than buying toothpaste at 15% discount, is to stick to your guns. And if somebody wants to hire you for 10% less than what the market value is for that position, you know, stick to your guns. I would encourage
yeah,
everybody to go, no, I am worth this. And if there comes a day where the work that I'm doing for this employer is not worth that, we can have that discussion, or you get fired. Right. But as an employee, like, if I was hiring an employee and I offered them 10% less and they said, no, I think I am worth this, and you're going to find that I'm worth this. I love that confidence. And
yeah,
so that's an attractive quality that I would definitely encourage people out there to know your worth and stick to your guns.
yeah. People are still hiring out there. If you, so I think there's a few different types of people that might be in a few different types of scenarios. I think scenario number one, a lot of corporate America jobs, you're in a position where you're like, raises are kind of scheduled. They're part of like annual reviews. Every year you're going to get so much of a raise, or every couple years you're going to get so much of a raise. Some people are in more of like industry norms where like every 5 years the industry just says, like, maybe like a teacher, like a union worker kind of thing.
Right.
um but typically in those situations there is some process, so it's harder to go to your boss and ask for a raise if you're kind of already in a system that's naturally, or on schedule giving you raises.
Right.
In that situation, like a quick example, I have a client who he's going to get a raise probably every about 3 years. um, he very much so understands his role in the company and what he's supposed to accomplish, and he does those things and he gets paid for those things. But because he's been doing this for a year since in his new role, and he got a raise to be in this new role, after in the course of a year, he's created so much efficiencies in learning his job and knowing his job, that he's taken a 40 hour work week and made it about a 28-hour work week,
Wow.
right? So he's created time. So what has he also done in that time? Now he's created some consulting roles, some additional above and beyond, both inside and outside the company. He's not
Hmm.
hiring or hiding this from his you know business or his company.
Yep.
But all that said, what he's really trying to do is he just got super efficient because he knows that now that he can do this consulting for a couple years until he gets a new role with more responsibility. Obviously, he'll have to go back to probably a 40-hour week and then slowly become better. And then he can
Yeah.
re-implement the consulting. On the flip side, there's people that don't have, they're in a job where they don't really have those structured raises. So I think, what you were saying, just find the value in yourself. You know what you're worth. Go and ask.
Yeah.
Don't be
And
afraid
if
to look
you're,
for other jobs, and
yeah, and
don't be afraid to create new jobs, side hustles.
yeah, I mean, and if you love your company, you love your job, go to your employer and say, listen, like, I would like to provide more value to this company, but I also would like to get paid more. What are some ways other than my position? If you're completely satisfied with my role and how I'm doing my work, I would love to do more, so emphasize, I want to provide more value. And
Mhm.
for that, I would like to get compensated even better for it. That's another healthy conversation to have.
So I do think between the first three that we talked about, creating like new sources of revenue, getting weight like job wage increases, asking for raises, all like I think we start to get a little bit more control. And I only say that you're not in complete control of giving yourself a raise if you're working for somebody else. But I
Right.
think far too often people do not take the initiative to ask. Do your homework, know what competitors are offering, go in and say, hey, boss, you know, for this role, all of my competitors are offering this much money. Should I start applying elsewhere? Is there any chance that you could give me a raise? I'd also be willing to take on this, and this responsibility inside the company.
Sure.
And for that, I would like to be compensated this much. Like if you do your homework and go to your boss and make his or her job easier, I think problems can get solved. Number four, again, something I think we have a lot more control over is lifestyle creep. I was reading a study recently, and it was common phrases at certain salary, like income points threshold.
Hmm.
The most common phrase for a person making under 100, and a family, like a household, making under $175,000 a year, was the word broke. We're broke.
Jeez.
The most common phrase for people making over $175,000 was, we have enough to make it. We have
Yeah.
enough to be okay. Enough was the word. So
Yeah.
under 175K, broke, over 175K, enough. Um, what I would just say there is, I do think, I mean, obviously, we've been talking about life getting more expensive. There is that. But I really do think defining what is enough is something that people lack. And maybe there's some truth in this study that just once you start having like $175,000 a year to live off of, maybe you got a little bit more like relief in your stress threshold that you can start thinking and defining like, hey, I think this is actually enough now, right? So you can start that definition. It's kind of a difference. Maybe there's a tipping point from that scarcity mindset to that abundant thinking that becomes, so there's a lot of variables that could play into this. But I really do think with lifestyle creep, most of us listening to this, very, very few people are earning today what they started earning. Or if you just started working in your career, most of you will be making more later on than what you're making now. I
Right.
go back to like my first years in like adult world, just being like, man, if I could just make 50 grand, I would be rich, you know?
Yeah.
Um, I make quite a bit more than that, and still like there's a lot of pressures. And I'm frankly, I say no to a lot of things, right? Like
I
there's just a lot of things I can't afford and I can't do still.
I remember thinking, like, if I could just make $2,200 a month take home pay, I would be rich.
Yeah. Those were the days, right? So
Those are the
what
days.
happens? What happens? What is lifestyle creep? Like,
Yeah.
like how would you explain that to say if you had to use that phrase and be like somebody's like, well, wait, what's lifestyle creep? How would you explain that?
Well, I think it happens, a little more quickly than maybe some people think. I don't think it's a small, I don't think it's very slow. I think it's very rapid onset. I think people once they realize, oh my gosh, I have more cash flow, maybe you got a job that doubled your salary, right? Now I have double the income every month to do something with. I can afford that car payment. I can afford going out and getting a suit or a handbag or something and putting it on the credit card because screw it. What does it matter? I just doubled my income. I can now afford that house payment. And so I think in our society, it becomes a series of different payments that people assume that they can, I can start affording the payments because people look on a very micro scale from month to month on what they can afford and often don't look at the whole picture. So I think honestly, from a mathematical perspective, the lifestyle creep is honestly those payments building up and up until, like we said in the beginning of the episode, things tighten up, inflation, interest rates go up, and you really feel the impact of those payments. Whereas maybe they weren't a problem in the beginning when things were, cheaper to borrow and you had just gotten that raise and we were on the up and up. I mean, the amount of clients I can think of two that bought new cars and it's like a $650 car payment. And when I talk to them right afterwards, they're so excited. Like, I can afford the payments, not a big deal. I love the car, blah, blah, blah. And then like 4 months later, both of them were like, I got to get rid of this car payment. This is killing me. Right. So I think that happens in a lot of different aspects of life.
While you're talking, I realized I actually had a lifestyle creep moment even this morning.
Oh no.
Um, Again, things in the business are going really well. Income's definitely going to go up this year, and it's warranted. Like, we both work really really hard, and have put in so much work into what we offer our clients. It's very very different than a lot of financial planners. What they're offering their clients. I mean, it's just factual. Like, but
Right.
the reality is things are going well and it's paying off. The hard work's paying off. I have two tabs right now comparing two different like golf memberships for some local golfing locations, and and it's just like one of those things. At the end of the day, I'm like, it's easy to turn this on and say yes to this. Like, I have the cash to pay for this membership for the year. But once it's a part of my life, that's going to become incredibly hard to say no to. And is this something that I want to pay for every year for the rest of my life?
Right.
And I think when it comes to saying yes to things, again, if I know who I am, so I wrote down three things. I think there's three ingredients to creating wealth, right? If you want to be rich, you need these three things, right?
Mhm.
The first thing you need is you need discipline. The
Yeah.
second thing is you need resources, and the third thing is you need time. And apparently some balloons on the screen. Oh man, I don't know what that filter is. The point is when we talk about all the things that before, number one was inflation, number two was like debt expense, number three was stagnant wages, that really all kind of weighs and infiltrates on um the resources that we have available to create wealth and make ourselves rich. When it comes to lifestyle creep, that is almost all on the discipline side. We don't have a lot of control over what inflation does to slow us down. We don't have a lot of control over overcoming debt things, especially when it comes to like student loans that we kind of probably necessarily took out at a point in our life. What we do have control over is saying no to things that don't align with our vision and values and where we want to be. So
Right.
when I by the time I like got done dreaming for a minute about being a member at this golf club, I'm like, yeah, maybe not. I'm
Yeah.
just, it doesn't align. Like, I will play golf this year. I don't need to be a member of a club. So
Yeah.
um that was one thing. Any other thoughts right now on lifestyle creep?
No, I think we're good. I think number 5 ties right into that, and then we can wrap up pretty quick here. But we were talking about dependence, like having kids or having parents getting older that need financial assistance.
Yeah.
That's actually alarmingly common nowadays. Something that our generation is going to have to prepare for. Sometimes in both cases, and that can definitely add to the lifestyle creep if you're we talk about saying no so that we're saying yes to other goals. If your kids in travel baseball, travel volleyball, travel soccer, travel basketball is doing all these things and you're paying thousands and thousands of dollars a year, that can add to your lifestyle. or going to private school or going to college someday. All these things can add to that lifestyle creep. So we have dependents written down here, but
Yeah,
written down.
I think so many people come into my office, parents, and they're talking about the heavy expenses of, you know, raising a child or children. They get to a point, and one thing that I've noticed is there is this like window of golden years, right? And that's usually after the kids are out of the home and college is established for the children based on whatever plan you have. But then there's also like, you got these high income years, low expense years right before, retirement, where we're laser focused on goals. And then
Right.
all of a sudden we get into retirement. And what we don't realize is just as expensive as our children were, our parents, thank goodness that we're living longer now and we get more time with our loved ones, but there's a cost to that. And
There
sometimes
is.
that burden, especially if our parents did not prepare the right way for retirement or for
Yeah.
late in life, that can be really, really expensive. And the number one like action that we can take to overcome that obstacle, and this can seem harsh, but you have to prioritize yourself first.
Hmm.
Right? Like, we have a duty and responsibility. I'm a parent. Like, I have a duty, I have a responsibility to my child, but part of my duty and responsibility is putting myself in the best position to not become an obligation to my child,
Right.
right? Same
Yeah.
thing. My mom, like, I love her to death and I will do everything in my power to care for her, but she has had time and an obligation to take care of herself. She's made choices and decisions that she's going to make. I hope she has more than enough, and that's the intention
Yeah.
that I have for her, is to have more than enough. However, if she doesn't, will I take care of her? I will give her everything that I possibly can after I take care of me and my family first. And that's really,
Yeah.
really harsh. Um,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people struggle with that, but having the right plan in place is going to be super important there.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of wrap up with number 6, and it's real, real easy.
Yeah.
I wrote down lack of literacy, but
Yeah.
honestly, if you're just a person, it's like, I just don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by lack of financial literacy. If
Right.
you don't know how or where to get started, listening to this podcast is a great first step. Reading some books, great first step. Google
Educate. Yeah.
resources, education processes are all great steps. But I think the number one thing that I would recommend, regardless of where you're at in your journey, reach out to someone that can sit down with you and put a roadmap in front of you of where you are, where you hope to be, and then walk alongside you and just make sure things are going the way that we intend as much as possible.
Yeah.
And when life isn't happening how it's supposed to and our heart rates jump, having
Yeah.
that professional that can keep their heart rate low, control the breathing, and say, hey, we've planned for this. Now it's
Yeah.
time to do these steps.
Yeah.
That's
I'd
that's
look
that's the
back.
combat for not knowing how to start, or not having the financial literacy we all need to make it.
Yeah. And within that, look back on our past episode last week about atomic habits. That'll feed very nicely into, maintaining a foundation of financial literacy. Well, everybody, we appreciate you guys hanging out with us this week once again. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you guys get your podcasts from. Look us up on harpethwealthpartners.com. If you have questions, you'll find both of our emails there. And then obviously in the comments, if you guys leave great questions, we'd love to address those too. So don't be afraid to shout us out down there, and we'll take care of it at that point.
Yeah, make sure you mash the follow, subscribe button, because we have some really, really cool and exciting topics coming up that I think you will not want to miss. It will benefit you to hear them. So we look forward to having you back. Thanks for your time, as always, and we appreciate you guys. Bye.
Adios, everybody.
We hope you learned something valuable today. We appreciate you including us in your journey towards financial betterment. It is important to us that you know this is for educational purposes only and not to be considered specific advice for any individual listener. If something we discussed is relevant to you and you have questions about how it might be uniquely applicable to you, please discuss that with a financial professional, or, of course, we are happy to have further conversations with you about your specific questions, needs, or circumstances. We welcome you to reach out to us via our website, harpethwealthpartners.com, or by emailing Brandon at bmc@harpethwealthpartners.com. Securities are offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice is offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Harpeth Wealth Partners are separate entities from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not to be intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult appropriate qualified professionals prior to making a decision. Investing includes risk, including fluctuating prices and loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Hypothetical examples presented are not representative of any specific investments. Your results may vary. We want to thank you for your time, and we look forward to having you back next week.